Welcome to Sourced, a platform for female journalists to be inspired and learn how they can progress in their careers. Our guest is Laura Purkess. She is the consumer features editor at The Sun, where she oversees personal finance features and investigations. We spoke to Laura about her unconventional route into journalism, the move from trade to national publications, and the art of a good scoop. Laura, welcome to Source. Thank you so much for joining us. So you are currently consumer features editor at The Sun, but we'd love to hear a bit more about what your journalism career has looked like up to this point and how you got started in the industry.
Yeah, so I got into journalism at about, oh my gosh, like 5.5, 6 years ago now, which doesn't sound that long to be an editor at a paper. I mean, it's not, that's crazy. It sounds crazy. I mean, when I first started, I couldn't have imagined that. But my first job was in PR. I actually met Talia in PR. And I worked at an agency for about a year and a half. And then I kind of got to know some journalists that way, and I was reading a lot of like financial press magazines and things in that role. And I just thought that looked quite fun. And a little junior reporter job came up at Citywire, which is a financial trade press magazine. It was Citywire New Model Advisor. And I just applied and I went through a few interviews and I got it. And I knew nothing about journalism when I went into it. I had never thought I wanted to be a journalist up to that point. But I didn't really know what I wanted to do, so I thought I'd just give it a go. And then I kind of went from there. I was a reporter for a couple of years on that magazine, and then I was made news editor after about 2.5 years. And I did that for about a year. And then I got approached by an editor at the Daily Mail. And, I just thought, again, why not? May as well go for it, because you don't always get the opportunity again. So I moved to Money Mail at the Daily Mail, where I was there for about a year working on print. And then I got approached by an editor at The Sun for a slightly senior reporter job, which I took. And now I'm here about a year and a half later. I've just started as an editor on The Sun's money desk.
Congrats. And Laura, I know you have a focus on finance at the moment. Have you always had that focus, or have you kind of dotted around quite a lot doing different things, or has that been your kind of main beat that you've taken?
Yeah, I was rubbish at maths at school. I would never have thought I got into finance. Oh my gosh, if I told my parents I was going to finance, they would have laughed at me when I was 18. But my first PR job was at a financial PR agency. So I kind of just got into it that way. I started learning about the clients and, you just like absorb a lot of jargon. So then when I saw this job at New Model Advisor, that was for like a financial trade press. By that point, I'd already learned quite a lot of that baseline jargony stuff. So I was able to kind of go into it with a bit of knowledge. And then I just found it really interesting. Like, you hear pensions and it sounds really dry, but I now love pensions, I can't believe I'm saying that out loud. But yeah, I went straight into that beat and I have kept it. And I've kind of gone onto the consumer side now, which is slightly different to the sort of deep trade finance. But it's the same topics, it's just approaching them in a different way. I've not really done anything else. I've done a couple of freelance pieces here and there, but mostly like personal experiences.
Yeah. And so I understand you also didn't have a kind of traditional kind of university degree either. Would love to know kind of, I guess, like what that has been like, whether that's been something that has been challenging for you, or if it's something that's actually perhaps given you a few more advantages. And yeah, would love to know kind of more about that experience for you.
Yeah, so well, I did start going to university. That's actually how I moved down to London because I'm from Staffordshire, from a little village just north of Birmingham, and I was insistent I wanted to go to London. And my dad was like, please go anywhere else but London, it's so expensive. And I was like, no, I'm going to London. So that was kind of my way to get down here because if you're not from London, it's really hard to get down. And I was like, if I don't go for university, I won't be able to get there. But I knew university was never really for me. I'm not a massive, I don't love academics. I didn't love the vibe. So I kind of got down here and started doing it. And then I decided to just, while I was still on the course, look for a job and see if I could just get a job without a degree. I was struggling with the degree. It was too hard for me. I did linguistics and I don't do linguistics. And I applied for loads of jobs. I was like, I'll take anything that will have me if it means I can stay in London. And I got this team assistant role at this PR agency before I'd finished my degree. And once I got it, I decided, I was already 2 years in, but I knew I wasn't going to be able to finish it with a good grade. So what was the point in staying? I'd got what wanted to achieve out of it, which was to stay in London. So I decided to leave university and start the job. I just turned 21 when I got the job. Yeah, I didn't look back from there. Has it been challenging? I think it's been, everyone assumes you'll have a degree, not just a degree, they assume you'll have a master's in journalism as well, which, that's the route most people go down. I had no idea any of that even existed when I got into journalism. I didn't know about City University. I didn't know what an NCTJ was. I saw it on the form, like, you need to be gold standard NCTJ. I was like, I don't know what that is, but I'm going to just apply anyway. And then, as it turned out, it didn't matter. I didn't need it. I don't know what I missed, but I obviously haven't needed
Mhm.
it.
Yeah.
So
You're
yeah, it's
clearly
been
doing
working.
fine without.
Yeah, and I think when I was in the trade, actually, I didn't really notice it. People didn't really ask me about it there. It was when I moved into nationals. I feel like one of the first questions people asked me was, "Oh, where did you do your NCTJ? Were you City or somewhere else? I can't even remember what it's called, but there's two big places people do it." And I was like, "Neither." And everyone's like, "What? What do you mean neither?" And then like, "Oh, where did you go to university?" And I can say I went to university in London, but I didn't finish it. Just leave that bit out.
Mm.
It definitely hasn't hindered me though. A lot of places, I think every job I've applied for has said you need a degree and you need a NCTJ. I've applied and I've been very upfront that I have neither. And no one's really asked me about it at all. No one's
Mm.
ever said, "Why did you not have a degree? Why don't you have an NCTJ?" I've just kind of got on without them.
Mm. And I guess like thinking about, I know I feel like it's quite a relief. It'll be quite like a relief for a lot of people to hear that because I think a lot of like young people who perhaps do wanting to go into journalism but aren't quite kind of prepared or don't have the means to necessarily do like a proper qualification in it would be really interested in hearing about, I guess how you have kind of, I don't know, like what advice you'd have to them. Like, would you advise people to perhaps go the route that you went and kind of get more hands-on experience first? And yeah, like what would your advice to them be at this point?
Yeah. I don't want to say don't get a degree and don't do an NCTJ because I know that a lot of places ask for them, and if I might, I'm aware that I probably got lucky in some aspects. I just happened to have editors that decided to overlook that, and
Mm,
that's great. I know that maybe not all editors will. So I wouldn't say no, nobody go and do that, but I would absolutely say that it's clearly not the be all and end all. And I think a lot of editors do value real experience over qualifications. It doesn't matter how many degrees you've got to your name, that's not what journalism's about. Journalism is about, if you can prove that you can get and write a good story, that's all that matters. And when I got into Citywire, I really kind of hit the ground running with a series of good like scoops and investigations. Some of it was just kind of coincidence. I stumbled across things and then I decided to look into them. But once I'd pulled them off, I had that under my belt to show to other editors that I could do that. And, it drew a lot of reader interest. And once I went to the nationals, I still found that I had editors there referencing some of the work I'd done as a junior reporter at Trades. And nobody asked me, about my degree or about my NCTJ. All they cared about was how did you get those stories, was it difficult? How did you go about it? That was all my interview questions. So I'd definitely say just getting a bit of work behind your belt that you can use, I think is so much more valuable than a bunch of
mm,
qualifications.
Yeah, completely. I feel like the bylines are more important than the qualifications there and the
I know
grades
it's a bit chicken
in
and
that
egg
sense.
though, because obviously you need to get the bylines from somewhere. But I think if you've got a good story, just pitching it and getting it in and getting it in front of an editor, it,
mm.
it will do you more, what's the opposite of more harm than good? It will do you more good than harm.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. And did obviously was very kind of happy when I saw you came over from the dark side all those years ago from PR over to journalism. Was it useful having kind of been in the PR side of things to get an insight as to kind of how different publications work, what editors and what journalists were looking for, and kind of the perhaps the style as well? Was that helpful for you?
I think it was helpful for me in making me an empathetic journalist. It definitely made me empathetic to PRs because I knew how hard that side of it was, and a lot of journalists haven't seen that from that side of things. And I also felt like it made me a lot more. I was willing to talk to PRs and explain to them what I really needed, and I think that's been helpful for me as a journalist because I can get what I want out of PRs, whereas I think a lot of people will just dismiss them. I think PRs can be a really, really valuable tool if you know how to use them and how to ask them for what you want. Because most PRs do they want the coverage, but they want to provide you with something that will get it that's good. You know, they don't want you to just be covering rubbish. So if you can really ask them for something useful, and I think just seeing that side of it and knowing how desperate PRs are to like get that good coverage made me realise I could use them to my advantage really well. I mean, obviously, being in a financial PR agency and having all those clients, I got quite a lot of that jargony baseline, which I could carry over into journalism. Journalism is, I mean, you have to hit the ground running from day one, and if you're on a niche, it's a lot to take in at once. So if you can get a bit of an understanding of the topic before you're suddenly having to write about it, I mean, that's always useful. Yeah, I think journalism, you suck stuff in like a sponge so quickly, but those first few weeks are so tough because you're having to write it really fast and it's so complicated, some of the topics. I think this will go for a lot of niches, not just finance. I mean, health seems, so jargon heavy as well. Yeah, I mean, I think someone who's worked in finance coming over to journalism, that experience would be great.
Yeah, definitely. And then I'm interested to know more about kind of the transition from going from B2B trade publications over to nationals. What did you find were perhaps the main differences? How did what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, I think, okay, well, I'll break it down to a few sections. So if we start with the writing style, I think when you're in the trades, I already thought I was quite a clear writer, I tried to be, but I think you don't realise that you still use quite a lot of jargon and you don't, because you're appealing to an audience that has that high level of understanding. When you come to a national, you have to kind of almost at first write it and then write it again, then write it again, and keep breaking it down and down and down until it's like your grandma could read it. And that's hard, especially when it's a really, really complicated topic. I think the skill of making it accessible to anyone, it's a real skill. And so having to learn that, you're filing copy, your editor's going, no, try again. What's that? That's a jargon word. And you don't even realise it's a jargon word that you've used. And finding new ways to say that stuff and realising you can cut every piece of jargon ever. You don't need to say a single piece. That's kind of the first bit. So that's on the writing. And then, I mean, on the culture, trades, I think, at first I thought the trades were crazy and, scary. I thought my editors were scary. But trades are quite a nice, quite a relaxed culture. And I think a really good place to learn because you've got a bit more flexibility, a bit more time, just a bit more space to kind of work on what you want to work on and learn a niche really, really well. You don't have the luxury of that time at a national, I would say. And if you want to get into a niche, it's hard to kind of get the jargon, learn that, and then break it down. I feel like you have to go from a trade to a national. I mean, if you went from a national to a trade, it would be like, whoa, because you're having to almost relearn the technical. Anyway, so yeah, the culture a national is a lot more fast paced. It's more brutal, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. If you enjoy the kind of the pressure and the fast pacedness, it's really fun. But you have to have a thick skin and be very, very like on it and aware all the time in a way that I didn't really feel at the trades, if that makes sense. I don't want to put people off, but yeah, nationals is if you like take the trade and times everything by 100, that's a national through.
What do you mean,
Sure.
Laura? What do you mean by brutal? I'm curious to know.
Sure. Without like naming anyone. So for example, if I had a story trade and I didn't know how to go about it, I could take it to my editor, we could sit down and we could go through it. And I never felt like I was, taking anyone's time. At national, it's a bit more like, why are you asking me for this? You should know this. It's all just you don't have the luxury of time on anything. So if you're if you're asking for someone's time and attention, it's really got to be worth it. I as features editor have a bit more time, so I like to sit down with people and go through this stuff. But for me, there wasn't actually a features editor where I am. So, you know, if you've got questions, you know, they have to be really, your editor's going to want to know why you're taking that time, you know, it needs to really add something. So it's a bit more brutal in like the time aspect. I would say as well, the competition is just higher at national. I mean, you've got a spot, you've got a job that people will regularly tell you so many people would die to have. And so you've got to be you've got to be the best, you've got to be the best, you've got to be beating your rivals. I was doing that at the trades, they're always saying you've got to beat your rivals, but at national you really got to be beating your rivals, and you've got to be, you know, delivering to a high standard. It's just, there's more pressure, there's more, the expectations are just a bit more. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
that's
completely.
great. Yeah, so I was going to ask as well, like obviously I mean, you've done so much. You talked earlier about kind of some of the scoops that you got. You've also done a few like investigative pieces. Would love to know, I guess, what some of your career highlights have been so far. If you can pick out one or two things that you've done that you're really proud of.
Sure. So, I mean, originally on the trades, I would say I didn't really know anything about scoops. I didn't really know what a scoop was. And I remember finding some stuff on the internet. I worked on a trade for financial advisors. Um, and one of the big things topics we were always covering is, you know, how they get their business. And I remember encountering some stuff online, what are now called lead generators, which are websites where financial advisors would basically advertise themselves. Consumers would go on and maybe put in their personal details, and they'd be matched with a financial advisor. There's a really well-known site called Unbiased, which is kind of for this. It's a directory where you can go and look for advisors. And then there's a lot of just sort of knockoffs of that. And I was looking into some of them and putting in my details and seeing what came out. And I found a lot of them were just really disingenuous, as in they were making themselves look like Unbiased, like a directory, and they'd have all these different firms on, but whatever details you put in, it would always be linked to one firm. And then I kind of got into Companies House, digging through files, and I found that some of these lead generation companies had the same director as a financial advice firm. And, you know, it quickly became apparent that they were advertising on Google, making it look like they were who consumers were being passed to, you know, like they'd been chosen as the right advisor, when in reality it was just a website generating back to them for everyone. And it was, you know, I was like, this feels really disingenuous, but I wasn't entirely sure how big what I was onto was. And then, you know, I remember telling my editor, and they were just like, okay, keep going, keep looking, keep digging. And we just got a series of investigations that found basically a lot of advice firms that have now collapsed. They weren't good advice firms, some of them were very dodgy. One of them had lost their permissions to give advice. And these firms were basically all owned by the same directors, all linked, and the same directors owned like a big lead generation company. And this lead generation company was just funneling thousands of inquiries to its own advice firms, making them look like the right choice. And that ended up being shortlisted for the Business Story of the Year at the Headline Money Awards. And that was I did that in my first year of journalism. And, you know, I just remember that really inspiring me into just something that you think looks a bit off. It doesn't seem like a big deal. You know, that's often what people are really interested in. The stuff that, just the little things that are misleading and that, you know, it's annoying. Yeah, I was really proud of that because that was kind of one of my
Rightly
first
so.
and then that kind of led to a spin-off, similar stories. You know, I kept looking into it, and we just found so many examples. And some of the biggest advice firms in the country that, you know, manage trillions of assets had regulated advisors doing this, just setting up their own sites and making it look like, you know, their advice firm was being recommended, but in reality it was just them buying Google space, paying to be above like genuine like directories. So yeah, it basically unraveled like a whole world. And then a lot of other people started covering it and looking into it themselves. So yeah, it felt like a big thing to uncover
Yeah,
quite early in my career.
no,
I
it's
have more
huge.
examples later in my career, but that was my first big proud moment.
Yeah, there's nothing like your first kind of piece of investigative journalism that really kind of gets you excited to keep going, and that thrill of kind of chasing a lead, chasing a scoop.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And then I had a question around that, I guess. Like when you knew, when you had that hunch, when you were kind of first found that something was kind of iffy was going on, like what kind of, like you mentioned you were like such a junior reporter, it's just in your first year. I don't know, did you have much support kind of for that investigative piece, or was it very much just like on your own, kind of feeling things out? Yeah, curious to get a sense of kind of what support, if any, you had, and yeah, and how you kind of managed to do that so early on in your career, I guess.
Yeah, this kind of comes back to the trade point, is that, this was all a trade publication. Um, and my editor, he was so supportive. I had the most amazing editor when I was at my first job. But to start with, because I had that kind of space and freedom, I wanted to make sure I was actually onto something. So I spent quite a lot of time working on it by myself. I probably didn't have to, that was just a personal choice. But then when I did take it to my editors, my editor at the time really sat down with me. He listened to what I had to say and, gave me feedback on where to go next. And that was so vital, because at that point, I was like, I know I have something, but I don't 100% know what to do next. Companies House, I mean, I learned that from my editors to look there, and then they were telling me what to look for. And, they gave me the time and freedom to spend quite a lot of time on Companies House going through. And that was where I started, figuring out you could click on a director and see what else they owned and where there were directors of, and making those links. And then I remember we sat down and we made what it did actually go into the story in the end, but we made a big like web diagram, of who was where and all the shareholdings they each had, and what percentage director they were, until we got this thing. We were like, okay. I mean, it was just, so it kind of just told itself, and that they sat down with me and did that.
I feel like that's like the traditional thing you see in the movies, isn't it? With the Venn diagram, spider,
Yeah,
bits of string
All
going.
on the wall.
yeah, it was exciting. It was really exciting.
Exciting.
How to see it like laid out in front of you.
Yeah.
It's one of
Awesome.
those things where at quite a young age, yeah, I kept telling myself like, is this a story? Am I just being, is this nonsense? But my editors were really supportive and
Mm.
told me to keep going. And that was, I mean, that was vital, and giving me the time. And I always felt like I could ask questions if I didn't know where to go next. And they'd help me with the right to replies and all kind of stuff. So I
Mm.
definitely had support.
And Laura, what would you say is, this is a big question, but what would you say is perhaps the most challenging aspect of your job at the moment? And kind of, do you have any fears or concerns about just the industry, journalism in general, and media in general, like in terms of where it's headed? Is there anything that kind of, I guess, keeps you up at night?
Oh my gosh. I'm worried about journalism every day, because I just feel like you see all the time people being made redundant, brilliant journalists. It feels like there's no discrimination about whether or not you're a great journalist. The industry is obviously struggling, and that's so worrying. The trend towards AI and everything. I've seen a couple of publications that I won't name that I think are using AI already to kind of pull copy from other places. And it just doesn't, it's not there yet. If we think it's there yet, it's not, because half of it doesn't even make sense. But I just like what we were just discussing about getting a really good story, going through it, spending all that time on it. AI can't do that, and journalists can't do that if they don't have time and freedom. And the only way we have time and freedom is if you've got other people to support you when you need that space.
Mm.
So yeah, I think it's a really worrying trend that we're going towards with all of the redundancies. What was the second part of the question?
Just kind of, I guess, thinking about your role now, as features editor, is there anything that you find challenging, or that, or anything you find challenging, I guess. I don't want to be too negative, but we're on this now, so.
I cannot stress enough what an exciting job journalism is, and nationals are so much fun. But I mean, it is, everyone knows it, it's such a high pressure, high intensity kind of environment, because no one has any time. I think no one's ever had any time, but these days there's just no time. If there was no time before, there's negative time now. Something that I should have done yesterday isn't going to be done tomorrow, and that's just a constant cycle. I mean, that is the challenge of my job. I'm doing features, and features, like we've just discussed, require time and space, and people need a clear head to go and investigate, and that is hard to get that time and space, because places have high demands for content. They need to make money, and everywhere's struggling. to do that. So getting people time to actually go off and do what I was able to do on the trades is the biggest challenge for me, because I really want them to have that time. And I'm kind of always battling with news for that. We're always vying for that time, basically. And features will always kind of come second to the fast-paced on diary news. So yeah, battling for that time is the biggest challenge of my job. It doesn't, it's not a bad thing. It's just a thing that I have to manage. But
Yeah,
it can be
definitely.
challenging.
Definitely. I'm going to play devil's advocate here, though, and you're kind of touching on your point about not having enough time, certainly kind of with the kind of the fast news environment. Do you think perhaps going back to your point around AI, do you think there could be a space for AI within the media? Um, Obviously, I completely agree with you. I don't think we're there yet. But when it comes to aggregation of kind of smaller news copy, certainly on the trades, I think maybe that could be useful. Or yeah, keen to hear what your opinion is.
For me, I definitely think AI has a place behind the scenes. We have a lot of stuff we have to do around, setting up the article. In fact, everywhere I've worked, you've got your content management systems, and there's so much faff that we have to spend time doing, ticking boxes and putting things in the right place and adding links. I would love to see an AI system that would just do all of that for us, because that like drains that time away from being able to do journalism. It's so vital, we have to do it, but it does take away from the bit of the job that we all love. So I think AI definitely has a place in kind of that back office stuff. As you said, maybe in like the really breaking news, if there's a way, almost like we get the PA copy, if there was a way that AI could just sort that out for us, maybe there's a space for that. But at the same time, I think writers like writing breaking news, and it's kind of a vital skill. And I don't really want that to be taken away by AI, even though it would save us some time. I mean, that's kind of one of the basics of the job, and being able to write really well at breaking news in a fast environment is as much the job as going off and doing the features. So I don't know if I want to see AI do that, but there's definitely a
Yeah,
place somewhere to
yeah,
help.
completely. The CMS systems are the bane of my life. There's always something you've missed out when inputting a story on the CMS. But Laura, this has all been amazing. Really enjoyed speaking with you. But one final question for you, and it's a big one again. But what advice would you give young kind of female journalists joining the industry today, or kind of starting out in their first role in media?
Yeah. So the industry, I think, was traditionally really male dominated. I would absolutely say it's not like that anymore. I've had so many editors that are women, and it's great. But a lot of the people who are in the environment now have had to fight to kind of get where they are. And it can feel, as we were saying earlier, it can feel a bit brutal, it can feel overwhelming. But everyone's just focused on doing the best job they can. No one's out to get you. And I would say my advice would always just be stick to your guns, you know, be confident in yourself and just keep going. I think a lot of people find journalism, yeah, it's too much, and they leave. And that I've seen a lot of really good journalists do that because they get in their head, and they think that it's they can't do it. And if you just keep a clear head and you keep going, and you can do it, basically, just keep going. And same on stories. If you have a good hunch, even if an editor knocks you back, just keep going. Because so many of the stories that I've kind of, since the one we discussed, so many stories that I've started looking into, I've had editors go, not sure. And then I've kept going in my own time, and it's panned out. Yeah, so I think journalism is very much just a job where you have to just stick to your guns and be confident in yourself.